This program contains dramatic reenactments and material that may be disturbing to some audience members. Viewer discretion is advised. When Corey Parker misses her waitress shift at the Ragtime Tavern, co-workers call police.
She was never late, never took time off from work, was always there, very punctual.
At Corey's apartment, officers make a horrifying discovery.
I've seen some pretty horrible crime scenes. This is one of the worst.
She was stabbed over 100 times.
The brutality is unlike anything detectives have seen until they uncover a savage murder across the country and a suspect with a bizarre connection to another killer. Forensic specialists from the Jacksonville Beach Police arrived to process one of the most gruesome crime scenes they've ever seen.
Everything looked normal until you got to the door of Corey Parker's bedroom.
It was very brutal. When you went into her bedroom, there was blood on the entire bed.
She was covered in blood from head to toe, completely unclothed, multiple stab wounds.
When she was being stabbed, whoever was stabbing her, and a downward, upward thrust of the hand was carrying blood from the body and throwing it up on the walls.
Investigators immediately noticed the posed position of Corey's body. The killer has arranged it for maximum shock value.
Her body was actually posed so that when the law enforcement officers and the investigators walked into the bedroom, they saw her bloody body up against a corner of the room, seated on her bed.
She was left in a way no woman should ever be left, with her legs spread open and propped up in the corner as though she had been fighting for her life.
With murders, they have a tendency to stage the body to where whoever finds the person it's a real shock effect on first visualization.
Stab wounds cover Corey's entire body.
She had been stabbed 101 times.
The two prominent wounds were in her neck, the main carotid arteries on either side.
Her hands and her fingers were sliced, which was evidence that she had, in fighting for her life, had actually grabbed the blade of the knife to ward off her killer unsuccessfully.
She fought with every ounce of strength in her body against this attacker.
As Detective Eddie Bounds closely examines the body, he notices something odd about the wounds.
They were actual stab wounds and had no blood emitting from the wounds themselves.
The majority of them were all post-mortem, which means that she was already deceased, so there was no blood running out of them. And they were just like little bitty anger marks, where if you would just take a knife and just jab at something, like just showing your anger.
In the bedroom, evidence technicians try to lift the killer's fingerprints from the body.
I had initially thought that there had to be a fingerprint on the body someplace, just with a number of like little swipe marks that we had on the body where it looked like somebody had touched the body in blood, which everything came up as negative.
There was no fingerprints found anywhere inside the bedroom or on the body.
A lot of times in this type of violent case, we're hoping that the victim was able to scratch the suspect, perhaps drawing blood or at least maybe some skin under their nails. And then what we do is take the fingernails, clippings, and then hopefully get as much DNA information out of that sample that we can.
Investigators do find other key pieces of evidence.
The killer, in addition to manipulating her body and posing her body, had actually also rolled down her panties, and they were in a wad next to her leg.
Those were taken and packaged and sent off to the crime lab.
A gold metal lighter is discovered beside Corey's bed. It's different from Corey's other lighters.
A lighter had been collected from Corey Parker's car, a lighter had been collected from Corey's kitchen, and a lighter had been collected from her bedroom. And all three of them were Bic lighters. And those were clearly inconsistent with this gold-plated lighter that was in her bedroom.
The evidence indicates the attack took place in Corey's bedroom, but bloodstains are also found on the wall outside the kitchen window.
You could tell where somebody had used that part of the wall to lower themselves out the window and down to the ground and held onto the wall.
The blood smears test negative for fingerprints.
And you could tell there were fingerprints without actual ridges or grooves. I knew from experience that the suspect would have had gloves on.
Another trace of blood is found by the kitchen sink. It could be the killer's.
An attack involving a knife or any other sharp instrument, there's a really good chance in a violent type act like that the suspect himself will cut himself on the knife.
As forensic specialists finish processing the crime scene, detectives begin interviewing Corey's friends. They believe Corey knew her killer.
I think the story that's being told here is there's some type of a relationship between the suspect and the victim.
You're looking for somebody with a lot of anger because this crime, it just screamed anger. The sheer number of stab wounds, the fact that he continued to stab her after she was obviously dead. You're just looking for a very angry person. And I might add, a very evil person.
Corey's friends say the 25-year-old victim was popular and well-liked.
She was tall, she was a good-looking girl, full of life. She had a circle of friends that she cared about deeply, and they would hang out together, they would go to the bars together. She was known as kind of the person who was always kind of making everybody laugh.
Everyone that we spoke with described her as a loving, funny, warm person. She was beloved by her friends.
She was initially from Rochester, New York, and she ended up in Jacksonville Beach, wanted to go to school here, and was in fact enrolled in one of our local community colleges.
She was really easygoing, social butterfly, and had tons of friends. She was super friendly, the same way with everybody, and really easy to talk to and hang out with.
Corey was last seen alive 2 days before her body was found.
I saw her on Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I was going to my mom's in Orlando, and she was staying for the orphans party so she could make some pies and bring them.
She had baked some pies that afternoon and gone out with her friends late Wednesday night and stayed out until after midnight, which put it over to the early morning hours of Thanksgiving. And her friends, when she said goodbye to them in the parking lot, they were the last ones to see her alive.
When Corey doesn't show up for the Thanksgiving party, her friends aren't immediately concerned.
They really didn't feel alarmed at first because she was single, she had boyfriends, very popular young lady. So really it wasn't that big a deal when she didn't show up for the party, the Thanksgiving party that night. It wasn't until she didn't show up the next day, she didn't show up for work, is when they became concerned.
Detectives believe Corey returned home late Wednesday night, or in the early morning hours of Thanksgiving.
She locked that back door, set her purse and keys down, and then went in the bedroom and got completely undressed and was in her underwear only when she got under the covers.
And at that point, the suspect was either already in the apartment, hiding somewhere, or made his way through the kitchen window and attacked her in her bed. And there was no sign of a struggle or any type of a confrontation anywhere in the apartment, not even in her bedroom. Everything was confined to the bed itself, and that's what leads us to believe that she was attacked while she was sleeping in the bed.
Investigators review their evidence. Blood traces by the kitchen sink and outside the kitchen window may belong to the killer. Corey's panties are sent to the lab for possible DNA evidence. A lighter with an unusual insignia was left on the bedroom floor.
You start at the center, the people closest to the victim, and you work your way out from there. And normally it starts with family, friends, boyfriends, people who are very close to a victim.
It's hard for Corey's friends to believe that someone they know is the killer.
I couldn't even imagine it. I think everyone was afraid. I know I was afraid because because I didn't know if one of the people in our circle of friends had anything to do with it.
As investigators await results from the crime lab, they begin to zero in on 3 suspects, each with a different but compelling motive. The savage killing of 25-year-old Corey Parker stuns the sleepy resort community of Jacksonville Beach.
The community was outraged and scared. This is every woman's nightmare, especially every young woman.
The fact that this was an unsolved homicide really kind of shocked the area. People were afraid.
There were a lot of people that were, locking their front doors now at night.
Everybody was hysterical and in shock, I think. Couldn't believe what happened.
Young women were terrorized. I mean, they were frightened, and they should have been.
After an exhaustive search of Corey's apartment, police canvassed the neighborhood.
The building that she lived in, most of the people were not home at that time, with the exception of the young lady and her mother that were living right next door to Corey.
Surprisingly, the neighbors heard no screams or shouts. During the autopsy, detectives find out why.
Whoever killed Corey had tried to stop the screaming and attacked the front of the throat.
The slashes to Corey's throat were fatal.
The medical examiner indicated that it was either a pocket knife or small kitchen knife, possibly a paring knife.
The autopsy finds no evidence of sexual assault.
Even though there did not appear to be a sexual assault, it does not mean that the attack wasn't of a sexual nature. It did appear to be of a sexual nature, only because of the rage that was involved with it.
We think that he was trying to rape her, and I don't think he was ever able to accomplish that.
Detectives ask Corey's friends who she was dating.
She had a boyfriend. They had only been dating for a few weeks, but they were really happy.
A quick background check reveals the boyfriend has a secret.
The young man that she was dating was married and had a family, and we virtually had to go to his residence to interview him.
They questioned him if he had a solid alibi. He was with his family for that weekend.
Yeah, I mean, he was able to tell us where he was at, what he was doing, and through checking with friends and family, he didn't pan out as a suspect.
Detectives shift their focus to Corey's workplace.
They indicated that there was a dishwasher that worked at the restaurant with Corey, and that he had come on to her, had asked her out a couple of times.
He was infatuated with Corey. Would go out of his way to try to help her as a waitress. He would do things and almost to the point of being annoying.
Witnesses described him as being obsessed with Corey. He had a self-admitted crush on Corey, and he had left a message on her voicemail machine about possibly seeing her on Thanksgiving Day.
He had actually invited Corey Parker over to his home for Thanksgiving dinner, and had even gone so far as to cook the dinner.
For the very beginning, he set off red flags because of just the way he was kind of out there, the way he held himself, the way he talked.
The co-worker is immediately brought in for questioning.
He gave some very disturbing statements to the police that had he had the opportunity himself to have killed Corey, he would have done it in a certain fashion that coincidentally happened to be consistent with the manner in which she was murdered.
He almost described the crime scene perfectly, and that led the police to be very suspicious.
We went to his apartment several times to gather evidence where he slept at, talked to his roommate, and we started following him around.
Meanwhile, detectives try to establish a timeline of Corey's last night alive. They interview Corey's friend, Tiffany, who was out with her that evening.
Tiffany put herself in the investigation because she came forward and said that she was with Corey at the Ritz bar.
She was one of the last people to see Corey Tiffany got in her car and went and picked up another friend. Corey got in her car to go home.
When she left there, nobody saw her again.
Later that night, Tiffany left her other friend's house and headed to Corey's apartment.
She told the investigators that she was supposed to spend the night with Corey. She also told investigators that she had called Corey on her cell phone.
When Corey didn't answer, Tiffany says she decided to head home instead.
Well, we checked that, and there was no phone call on the records to indicate that Tiffany had called.
She told us about these phone calls that never occurred.
It made them wonder why she had given inconsistent statements and target her as a potential suspect.
Detectives wonder, could Tiffany possibly be involved in Corey's murder? Her friends tell detectives she seems to know surprising details about the crime.
We were told that she was telling people what had occurred and how the victim was found and how she was killed.
The descriptions of the crime scene set off red flags for the detectives because they had not released a lot of the details about what that crime scene looked like.
Investigators question Tiffany's friends, who say there may be something else.
And we got information from talking to everyone that knew Tiffany, that Tiffany had a real sincere liking to Corey Parker. Some of them attributed that liking as to being overly infatuated with Corey to the point of it possibly being some type of a romantic relationship.
Detectives move quickly to re-interview Tiffany, but find out that she's gone.
We were going to reapproach her, but she moved to Louisiana, and we had to track her down to Louisiana to start our secondary investigation into her.
After investigators return from questioning Tiffany in New Orleans, the crime lab issues its preliminary report.
Every item that I tested from the actual scene of the bedroom did match her. It was a very bloody, gruesome scene. Every DNA sample that I tested from that area came back to match Corey Parker.
We did find one portion of blood that did not belong to her, which was on the kitchen counter area.
But more important are the bloody panties found on the bed.
The laboratory was able to recover a forcibly removed head hair from the panties.
The hair does not match Corey Parker's DNA. Corey most likely pulled it from her attacker.
If somebody's attacking you and you want to defend yourself, you're going to use any means possible.
And the recovered hair has a full root bulb attached, allowing more accurate DNA testing.
When hair is forcibly pulled from the head, it then contains the root material, that white, bulbish, meaty-looking material at the end of the hair. It's that what we do DNA testing on.
The Federal Bureau of Investigation, they obtained a full nuclear DNA profile from that hair root tissue.
With the hair and blood evidence, analysts are able to produce a complete DNA profile. Detectives are now one step closer to catching a killer. Detectives in the Corey Parker murder investigation have narrowed their search to two suspects. One of them is Corey's close friend, Tiffany, who was with her the night she was killed.
There was a search warrant obtained for Tiffany's DNA because she refused to cooperate with our investigation and would not help us.
But before Tiffany's DNA can even be tested, she's eliminated as a suspect. The DNA recovered at the crime scene was left by a man.
She was exonerated in that she's a woman, and we did know from the DNA that the person that killed Corey Parker was a male.
I think she was just scared. She was intimidated by all the initial questioning. She was afraid that we were going to charge her with the crime.
When detectives asked Tiffany how she knew so much about the crime scene, she says a friend had been there.
Tiffany had gotten that information from somebody that worked for fire and rescue that had been called to the scene initially.
Investigators shift their focus to the third suspect, one of Corey's co-workers at the Ragtime Tavern. He too is quickly eliminated.
His DNA and his fingerprints was obtained and compared to the physical evidence that we recovered.
The DNA doesn't match. Detectives find themselves at a dead end.
The investigators were working day and night, and we were just following up every lead we could follow.
We questioned probably between 80 and 100 people, including co-workers, fellow students, neighbors. There's just a magnitude of people that we had to cover to exclude them as being suspects.
Residents of the resort community are growing impatient. The brutality of the crime has everyone on edge.
There was a lot of pressure for the Jacksonville Beach police to name a suspect and to get this case solved.
I couldn't believe they didn't know who did it within a month. As it went on, yes, I started to think that they weren't going to be able to solve the case.
Hoping for a lead, Corey's family and friends decide to post a reward.
Everywhere you go, you saw a picture of her and then a short definition of how the crime occurred, a little bit about Corey, and then, of course, the reward.
The posters spark renewed interest in the case. Within days, police receive an important tip.
We received a phone call from a subject who had been at a party.
There was 4 people that were there at this sort of get-together on the lake around Memorial Day weekend.
And they were talking, and the name Robert Denny came up.
They recalled how at the time that this murder occurred, that his personality transformed. He became very nervous, was crying a lot, was upset.
And then one person added in, oh, well, you know, he lived right near that woman that got murdered. And then another person said, well, you know, he told me he used to watch a woman that lived downstairs from him.
When detectives arrive at Denny's apartment, they discover he hasn't lived there for over a year. But they're shocked by how close Denny's apartment was to Corey's.
And his bedroom is in the upper corner there by that wooden balcony. And that was his bedroom. And it overlooked the victim's apartment, which is this building closest to me.
From his living room, he had an actual direct shot, a vision into her home. When she would enter her home or stand in her kitchen, he could actually see in her house and know when she was there or not.
At the time of the murder, Denny was only 17. Police records show he was interviewed during the neighborhood canvass.
He basically told police at that time that he didn't pay any attention to the area of the homicide. That was it. Nothing further was documented.
Denny's co-workers tell police that he started acting very strangely at the time of Corey's murder.
He told everybody that he had a child that was killed in Texas, and he had to go back to Texas for the funeral.
And his co-workers immediately began to raise funds to put him on a plane to get him home so that he could bury this child.
And the manager of the restaurant took that money over to his sister, who lived locally also. And when he brought the money to her, he said, look, we've collected this money for Robert for his dead child. We'd like to give it to him. Can you give it to him? And the sister said that he didn't have a child.
Denny's sister informs detectives that Robert lost his job after being caught in the lie. He moved in with her, but before long, she asked him to leave.
He would be up all hours of the night, and she had actually found out that he was trying to peep in her window to her bedroom at night from the outside of the house to see, you know, what she was doing.
But investigators are stunned by what Robert Denny's sister tells them next.
When I was talking to her, she asked me if I thought that he was a suspect in this homicide. And I thought that was interesting, and I said, well, you know, why? And she said, well, because of, number one, where he lived, but that her other brother in Texas had also committed a stabbing, and flags went up.
Robert's older brother, Patrick, had been convicted of a similar murder in 1991 in Texas.
He was in prison at the time for murdering a young woman, stabbing her to death.
He had a paper route, and this victim was one of his customers, and he had gone to her house to pick up the money that she owed him, and knocked on the door. She opened the door. He told her why he was there. She turned around to go get the money out of her purse, and he waltzed in with a knife.
He intended to rape the woman, and she fought him, and he ended up stabbing her to death.
Patrick Denny stabbed his victim 97 times. Detectives can't help but wonder, was Robert Denny involved in some kind of sadistic competition with his older brother?
After Patrick committed that crime, stayed in the same bedroom at the family home with Robert Denny for about 8 or 9 days. And who knows what they talked about.
Hoping for answers, detectives contact prison officials in Texas.
We had an investigator from the prison in Huntsville, Texas, go and talk to Patrick about Robert, but it had been so long since he had communicated with Robert that he really had no information.
Investigators are disappointed, but the evidence against Robert Denny continues to mount. Denny's apartment was so close to Corey's, he could see into her kitchen window from his living room window. Corey's murder is eerily similar to a homicide committed by Robert's brother, Patrick, 8 years earlier. Denny's behavior turned erratic at the time of Corey's death.
I'm thinking this is looking more and more like Robert Denny could be a possible suspect.
The next step for detectives is to track down Robert Denny, and they have a lead. His sister says Robert is living with a 52-year-old woman he met on the internet.
She gave me a copy of an email that he had sent her, and the IP address came back to Easton, Maryland.
Detectives decide to pay Denny a visit. They now have the killer's DNA in a hair ripped from his head. Will Robert Denny's DNA match? Two years after Corey Parker's murder, detectives locate their prime suspect, Robert Denny, in Easton, Maryland. Police in Jacksonville Beach contact local authorities there.
I made contact with one of the detectives, explained what we were doing.
Maryland police say they already know about Denny. He'd been involved in a recent domestic disturbance.
Robert Denny and this woman's husband, they were out on the front lawn fighting with each other, and the police were called. He wasn't arrested for that, but there was a police report about it.
With just a circumstantial case, Jacksonville Beach detectives want to get a sample of Denny's DNA without letting him know he's a suspect. Local police in Maryland agree to help.
They devised a story that he was a suspect in a small battery that had occurred up in Maryland. Knowing that obviously he was not guilty of doing anything wrong, they had hoped that he would voluntarily give his DNA.
Well, when we asked him for the DNA sample, he declined. He said, I'd like to speak to my attorney first.
So plan B was to try to surreptitiously take his DNA during the meeting.
Denny is allowed a smoke break. An officer stands nearby, hoping to scoop up Denny's spent cigarette.
When he smoked the cigarette and he was finished with it, he took the butt and put it behind his ear and didn't discard it. So that was out initially. That didn't work for us.
Denny is offered a bottle of water, but he refuses. Detectives try one last trick.
We had 3 envelopes there that contained a piece of paper on department letterhead that said, I, Robert E. Denny, have been asked for a DNA sample, and at this point, I declined to give one. And we were going to ask him to sign those forms, each, there was 3 of them, and then lick the envelope and seal those envelopes.
Denny signs the statement.
And he put the envelope back across the table to the police officer and said, you can lick the envelope.
He looked at the investigators and he said, look, Y'all have tried 3 times to get my lips on something. First the cigarette, then the bottled water, now the envelopes. Seal them yourself. Is there anything else? If not, I'd like to leave.
Investigators allow Denny to leave, but they're not giving up.
You do what the police do best. You surreptitiously surveil somebody where they don't know that the police are watching you, and you hope that they leave something.
Police keep a close eye on Denny, patiently waiting for him to abandon his DNA.
We were looking for saliva. Anything that we could possibly get their lips on or get their saliva off of.
For example, their toothbrush, a cup that they drink from, something that you would hope that the person that you're trying to get the profile from would have used that item.
The surveillance team monitors Denny's workplace.
We started taking photographs and waiting, just waiting all day for him to do something, that we could get.
Detectives spend a week watching Denny pocket his cigarette butts. Then, without thinking, Denny makes a careless mistake.
He spit on the ground and walked back in the office.
And it was just like, oh my God, look what he did, he just spit. And he spit more than once. So after that, we went, we're not gonna let that go.
A few minutes later, he came back out with his 52-year-old girlfriend. They got in the van and drove off. And then I went up there along with my team, and I recovered his saliva off of the ground.
The swabs are hand-delivered to the FBI lab.
The DNA analyst that I spoke to initially said he was optimistically hopeful that we could get a result.
Detectives return to Jacksonville Beach and anxiously await the test results. 2 weeks later, they get the call.
They called us and told us it was positive. And it was like, yes, finally. And we were ready to go get him. We wanted to go get him.
I just kept saying, are you positive it's him? Are they 100% sure? And Katie Kingston assured me this is definitely the person. That was the best feeling ever.
It's like having a concrete block pulled off your shoulders.
I was so happy. It's like, all right, finally.
But prosecutors still aren't satisfied. They want an absolutely airtight case.
You think to the rebuttal. If we say this is how we know the defendant did this crime, how's he going to respond to that? What's he going to say?
Is he going to say, oh yeah, I had a sexual relationship, it was consensual, and me and her had a thing going, and I cut myself when I was peeling an orange, and that's how the blood ended up on the kitchen sink. So you have to have the ability to be able to explain why that DNA shouldn't be there.
And you have to get him to either admit the crime or completely deny ever being in there.
Prosecutors believe their best hope is to get Denny to say he didn't know Corey and was never in her apartment.
So we wired Katie and we approached Robert at his house.
Playing on Denny's arrogance, they send Detective Kingston to interview him.
Robert Denny thought he was smarter than women. We knew he could manipulate women because he had convinced this 52-year-old woman to move her husband out.
I decided to pretend like I was just a silly girl from the office who was sent around the country by the detectives to talk to everybody who had lived in the apartments.
It's a daring plan, but if Denny senses a trap, Detective Kingston could be in immediate and serious danger.
Hi, Robert, Denny. My name's Katie Kingston. I need to run a couple questions by you. Sure.
Get more solved online. Robert Denny's DNA matched to the crime scene, Investigators are anxious to wrap up their 2-year-long investigation. Detective Kathleen Kingston is sent to Denny's house to speak with him.
In one folder, I put Corey Parker's picture in there. And then in another folder, I made a list of all the people who had lived in the apartments.
If Kingston can catch Denny in a lie, prosecutors will have what they need.
I drove to the house, and unannounced, I didn't call first or anything. I knocked on the door, and the woman came out. And I said,
"Hi, it's Robert Denny here. Can I see him a minute?"
Well, they thought I was somebody else that they were expecting about some kind of work program he was doing. And so she said, "Just a minute," and he came to the door.
"Hi, Robert Denny. My name's Katie Kingston."
Okay.
How do you do? I'm a detective, and you're a witness in the neighborhood canvas from a couple of years ago for a homicide that happened in Jacksonville Beach.
Oh, Jesus, that's what, 3 years?
2 years, I think. I think it's been 2 years.
And I tried to play it down as much as possible because I didn't want him to slam the door and go in the house.
I've been going down the list of all these people. All these people that lived in your building right here. You know any of those people? Because I've been going around. I talked to, that's you.
Yeah, that's great.
And he kind of laughed, you know. And he got more and more relaxed and, you know, was kind of talky and that sort of thing. And I thought, good, yeah.
Detective Kingston shows Denny a photograph of Corey.
Do you know Corey Parker or ever talked to her? Show picture. That's Corey Parker. No? Okay. No. Did you know that Corey Parker lived in the apartment? Let me show you that picture.
No, I didn't know.
You didn't know she lived?
We knew the ones that were in our building.
Okay, you never went to her apartment?
And got my denial and said, "Thank you very much." Turned around and I left. I was thrilled. I was, all I kept thinking was, yes, it's time. It's right, this is time. And it says, "Corey, this is for you." I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Word of Robert's denial is relayed to the state attorney's office.
Once that was done, we added that information to the arrest warrant, and we had a judge here sign that warrant.
We went back with the Easton Police Department, and we surrounded the house and immediately took them into custody with no problem.
Denny is taken to the Easton Police Station, where Detective William Carlisle and a local officer are waiting for him.
Robert, basically, I have enough physical evidence to charge you with murder of Corey Parker. I'd like to give you this opportunity to explain to me what happened.
What happened? No, they won't. Just wait.
Denny tries to talk his way out of the accusation. Detective Carlisle takes a different approach.
Robert, I just want to let you know that I'm aware of what happened with your brother and the situation with your brother.
That's my brother.
I understand that.
That is my brother.
I understand
That's
that.
not me.
Robert, I know. I know that he...
I want to mention that he has nothing to do with me. I am not my brother. He has nothing to do with it. You go next question.
Detectives tell Denny his DNA was found in Corey's apartment. He still claims he's innocent.
Robert, I don't believe you.
Okay, you don't have to believe me, but
I'm just being honest with you. Do you know her at all?
Who?
Corey.
What, the girl that got killed behind me? Is that what you...
I'm done, okay?
They tried to interview him, but it didn't work. they didn't end up getting anything from him. But you could tell he was very distraught. It was like, you know, he's thinking, they got me. They finally got me.
Denny is extradited to Florida and charged with first-degree murder. But with no confession, detectives are still working the case.
The investigators in this case never gave up. Even after Robert Denny was arrested and in custody, they continued to look at the jail logs as to who was coming to visit Robert Denny.
One of Denny's visitors is an ex-girlfriend. Brought in for questioning, she adds another piece to the puzzle.
Robert Denny's ex-girlfriend told us that that gold lighter belonged to Robert Denny. She had seen it in his possession.
The gold lighter belonged to none other than Robert Denny.
After 6.5 years, Robert Denny goes on trial for the murder of Corey Parker. Although he was 17 when he committed the crime, Denny is charged as an adult. His defense team offers a novel defense for the damaging DNA evidence.
They surmised that because the apartments were so close together that perhaps Mr. Denny had sneezed, and that would explain his DNA in her apartment.
There was some discussion in regards to the hair evidence, particularly how that hair could have blown through an open window.
Another theory was that the blood could have been dragged in by a cat.
Their theories were, quite frankly, ridiculous.
The trial lasts for 3 weeks. The jury deliberates for less than an hour.
We were very surprised when we got the bell that a verdict was in.
Robert Denny is found guilty of first-degree murder and receives a mandatory life sentence.
Life. He'll die in prison. Robert Denny will die in prison.
I think it's better to spend your entire life in jail and have no chance of parole than it is to just be put to sleep.
Investigators reflect on just how close Denny came to getting away with murder.
Robert Denny had no criminal history. We had nothing to work off as far as him being a suspect. We had no information that he'd ever made contact with Corey. Robert Denny came very close to getting away with this.
If not for his coworkers sitting on that dock and talking about his bizarre behavior, I don't know that he ever would have made it on the investigators' radar screen. He might still be walking the streets.
The individuals that were a part of that tip did receive $5,000 each for their information.
For investigators, it's been an emotional, personal journey.
I always related to Corey. We were the same age and living much the same lifestyle as single women at that time. And I got to know Corey's family and came to adore them.
It took a group of people, not just one, and it took a lot of work, and it paid off.
It was a privilege to handle this case and to be able to bring this family some measure of justice. I'll never forget Corey Parker. She'll be in our hearts for the rest of our lives.